Article 2, the Executive Branch. Section 1, the President. The executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States of America. This, again, is the vesting clause. It's the clause that gives the President, in this case, the specific power to be fulfilled by the office. We saw in the legislative branch, they were vested with legislative power, the power to create laws, to make laws. The President is vested with executive power, the power to enforce laws. For example, the FBI functions as the National Law Enforcement Agency. Goes on to say, he shall hold his office during the term of 4 years, so the President and subsequently the Vice President both serve 4-year terms. There is no stipulation put into the Constitution originally for how many of those terms they are allowed to serve. It won't be until the 22nd Amendment that we actually constitutionally allow for only 2 terms to be served. Otherwise, it was the precedent set by President George Washington to only serve 2 terms. It wasn't until Franklin Roosevelt in the 1930s and 40s that any president was elected for more than 2 terms. Teddy Roosevelt ran for a 3rd term, but was not elected. The Constitution continues to say that the President and, together with the Vice President, chosen for the same term, be elected as follows. Each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors. This is the establishment of the Electoral College. Notice it's the responsibility of the states to determine who is an elector for the President. The number of electors, according to the Constitution, is equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in Congress. So it's a pretty simple formula to figure out how many electoral points a state gets to determine the president. Every state gets at least 3 because the minimum number of senators is 2 and the minimum number of representatives is 1. Wyoming only gets 3 because its population is only 600,000 people. For the state of Missouri, we have our 2 senators plus the 8 representatives, giving Missouri 10 electoral college votes for president. California has the largest number of electoral college votes at 55. They have their 2 senators plus 53 representatives. This may seem like a lot, but the electoral college has in it an inherent unfairness to population. So 55 seems like a lot when you compare it to 3 or 10, but when we look at the population of states like California, there are nearly 40 million people in California compared to the 600,000 people who live in Wyoming. This means for every 1 electoral college vote, there are 200,000 people in Wyoming that would theoretically share that vote, and in California, there would be approximately 700,000 people for every 1 electoral college vote. The system was established originally not for the benefit of the people per se, but rather as a way for the states to have representatives within the federal government and federalism. There was also a belief by the founding fathers that the broad populace would not be fully up to making a good decision for who the president should be, given that the position was so far removed, and they left it to more of the politicians to make that decision. This is a system that we still have in place today. A little more detail on the Electoral College. I like to think of the Electoral College as a game to win the presidency, each state being worth a different point total in your road to victory. In order to win, the presidential candidate would need to earn 270 votes. It is possible to have a tie at 269 votes. That tie would be broken by the House of Representatives, according to the next section. If we add up the number of representatives, there are 435 representatives, and then the 100 senators is only 535. Where do the extra 3 points come from? Well, they come from the 23rd Amendment, which gives 3 electoral votes to the District of Columbia. It is possible for a president to win the electoral vote but lose the popular vote. You'll notice that there is no provision for a popular vote for president in the Constitution at all. However, we did add a popular vote component in the early 1800s. So the popular vote does not determine the president. It is the Electoral College only that does that. And 5 times in American history has a president lost the popular vote, that is, received fewer votes of the people than their opponent, but won the Electoral College. John Quincy Adams, for example, in 1824, Rutherford B. Hayes in 1876, Benjamin Harrison in 1888, George Bush in 2000, and Donald Trump in 2016. There is a last provision in the Constitution saying that no senator or representative or person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States shall be appointed an elector. Again, it's up to the states to determine determine how the electors are chosen and who the electors will be. So you'd have to look at your individual state to see how they set those rules. The next portion of the Constitution sets up the voting process for the Electoral College. It's rather lengthy and has all been superseded by the 12th Amendment in 1804. So I'll give you an overview of what the original process was, and then we'll discuss the 12th Amendment changes. The Constitution says the electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for 2 persons sealed to the seat of government. The Congress will then open all the certificates, and the votes shall then be counted. The person having the greatest number of votes shall be the president. There is then a consideration for what happens if there is a tie, and the tie is broken by the House of Representatives. In every case, after the choice of the president, the person having the greatest number of votes of the electors shall be the vice president. There's a provision for what if there is a tie for that as well. So in breaking this down, the electors vote. The top vote getter is the president, and the second place vote getter is the vice president. This was superseded, as I said, by the 12th Amendment in 1804, after only 4 presidential election cycles, 2 of which were George Washington, and those were not contested at all. So it only took 2 contested presidential elections for there to be identified a problem with the original process for electing president. The 12th Amendment refines the electoral process by creating 2 separate ballots, one for president and the other for the vice president. What this has come to be in our current presidential election process is the president will choose their running mate for the general election or the popular election, and the people broadly will vote for the president and the vice president together. But remember, it's not the vote of the people that elects the president. The vote of the people determines which presidential candidate wins the points for their state in the Electoral College. The Electoral College will meet later to determine the president, basing their votes in the Electoral College on the outcome of the broad popular vote in the general election. So still in the Electoral College vote, which is after the general popular vote election, the Electoral College will vote for the president and the vice president. Their lists have been predetermined by the selection of a running mate by the presidential candidate. There are proposals that exist as alternatives to the Electoral College, though I don't see there being much hope for amending the Constitution at the current time. One alternative would be the direct popular election of the president. Another would be to allow electoral votes by districts rather than the winner-take-all system currently. Whoever receives a majority of votes within a state would earn all of the points. Only Nebraska and Maine separate their votes proportionally. Those would be 2 examples of ways to handle the presidential election other than the Electoral College. The Constitution goes on to say, the Congress may determine the time of choosing the electors and the day on which they shall give their votes, which day shall be the same throughout the United States. As I said, this is specifically talking about the Electoral College, which meets in early December to decide the presidential votes and the presidential outcome. However, we also vote for the president as a people in the general elections on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. The Constitution continues, no person except a natural-born citizen or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of this Constitution shall be eligible to the office of president. This is the first constitutional qualification. Must be a natural-born citizen, born in the United States or born to at least one American parent. The provision for a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of this Constitution, because no one would have been born a citizen of the United States prior to there being a United States. They would have been British citizens or citizens of some other country, so they had to write in a provision for that. Neither shall any person be eligible to that office who shall not have attained to the age of 35 years. So the minimum age is 35 years old. The youngest person to ever become president was Teddy Roosevelt. He became president at 42, though not elected. He took over when President McKinley was assassinated. The final provision for a president is that they have been 14 years a resident within the United States. The Constitution was being written in 1787. 14 years prior to that would be 1773. So it seems like they wanted the first president to be living in the United States at the time of the Revolution. The next part of the Constitution has also been modified by actually 2 amendments. It says, in the case of removal of the president from office or of his death, resignation, or inability to discharge the powers and duties of the said office, the same shall devolve on the vice president, and the Congress may by law provide for the case of removal, death, resignation, or inability, both of the president and vice president, declaring what officer shall then act as president, and such officer shall act accordingly until the disability be removed or a president shall be elected. This was modified by the 20th Amendment in 1933 and by the 25th Amendment in 1960. 1967, both clarifying what would happen in the case of a death or removal of a president, or more specifically the vice president, and those go into more detail on how those things should happen. The president shall, the Constitution continues, at stated times receive for his services a compensation, which shall neither be increased nor diminished during the period for which he shall have been elected, and he shall not receive within that period any other emolument from the United States or any of them. This prevents Congress from rewarding or punishing the president by increasing or decreasing his salary. It also says that he will receive a compensation, so he'll be paid. Currently, the president makes $400,000 a year. It also sets up an emolument clause, which forbids the president from receiving any emolument or salary from any state or any other institution as an effort to prevent corruption, bribery, treason, things of that nature, or other conflicts of interest. The final part of Section 1 says, before he enter on the execution of his office, he shall take the following oath or affirmation. I do solemnly swear, or affirm, that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States, and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. The President currently takes this oath on noon of January 20th. It's important to note the 4 things the President swears to do when taking the oath of office. They are to execute the office of President, and they are to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. It's interesting to note that the object of their preservation, protection, and defense is the Constitution and not the country. The intent of this oath is that the Constitution will do the job of defending the country and of the people within it. It would be possible, as in the case of a king or tyrant, that if you pledged to defend the country, you could violate the rights of the people that were in it in order to defend the country. So the defense of the country could be manipulated in such a way that it could come at the cost of the people living within your country. The Constitution forbids that by making sure the president takes his oath to defend the Constitution. In the oath, the president swears to faithfully execute the office of president as well. This goes back to the original vesting clause at the beginning of Section 1, where the president is vested with executive power, the power to carry out law, not the power to create law or write law, but simply to implement what Congress has voted into place and the president then signs.